Right now, somewhere it's raining, and you know exactly what to do. Close the window, make something warm, pull a blanket over your legs, let the sound of it lull you half asleep on the couch. Rain, to you, is one of the most relaxing sounds in the world. But that same sound, the exact same rhythm, hitting the exact same kind of ground, used to be a warning siren. And for most of human history, hearing it did not make anyone sleepy. It made them move. Because for tens of thousands of years, a full day of rain wasn't weather. It was an emergency with a countdown attached. And what your ancestors did during that countdown shaped almost everything that came after it. Start with the obvious problem: cold. You lose body heat far faster when you're wet than when you're dry. Some estimates put it at over 20 times faster. Without woven clothing, without a roof that actually holds, a single day of steady rain and temperatures barely above 50 degrees could push a human body toward hypothermia in a matter of hours. And that threshold existed almost everywhere early humans lived. Even in parts of Africa, high elevation rainy seasons got cold enough at night to kill someone who was already soaked and already exhausted. So the cold alone was enough to end a life. But it wasn't the only thing waiting in the rain. The second problem was where people actually lived: caves, rock shelters, overhangs near rivers and at the base of hills, because that's where water collected, where game passed through, where the land gave you walls on three sides for free. Which is exactly why heavy rain turned those same shelters into traps. Archaeologists digging through cave floors have found entire layers of flood sediment sitting right on top of hearths and tools, meaning the water didn't just pass nearby. It came in while people were still living there. Some of those layers are thick enough that researchers can tell the site was abandoned afterward and never resettled. Imagine trusting a place with your life and then watching it fill with water while you're still inside it. And then there's the third problem, the one that turns a bad night into a nightmare. Rain doesn't just push people indoors, it pushes everything indoors. Predators seek shelter too, and sometimes the driest, safest overhang for 3 miles has already been claimed by something with claws. Cave sites in southern Africa have turned up human remains layered together with the remains of large cats. And some of those human skulls carry puncture marks that match big cat teeth almost exactly. Rain didn't just make the world uncomfortable, it compressed it. Predator, prey, and shelter all forced into the same small dry footprint at the same time. So, with cold closing in, water rising, and something moving in the dark just past the firelight, there was exactly one job that mattered more than any other: keep the fire alive. This job was more terrifying than it sounds, because for most of human history, starting a fire from nothing was not a guaranteed skill. Evidence of controlled fire use goes back at least 400,000 years, with some sites suggesting groups were tending flame close to 1 million years ago. But tending an existing fire and creating a brand new one from scratch are two completely different problems. For a huge stretch of that timeline, plenty of people could do the first and not the second. Which means if the fire went out during a 3-day storm, you didn't just start over. You might not be able to start over at all. Some groups solved this by never letting the flame fully die in the first place. They packed smoldering embers into hollowed logs or wrapped them inside a tough, spongy fungus that grows on trees and holds a spark for hours without bursting into open flame. Something researchers now call tinder fungus. It functioned almost like a biological ember box, something you could carry between camps. We're not guessing about how seriously people took this. When Otzi, the roughly 5,300-year-old body preserved in the Alps, was examined, his belt pouch contained a complete fire kit: tinder fungus, a flint striker, a lump of iron pyrite for sparking, backup plant material in case the first attempt failed. 5,000 years after the storms this video is about, people were still carrying dedicated emergency fire equipment. That tells you everything about how much a dead fire actually cost. So during a downpour, someone's entire job might be sitting an arm's length from the flame for hours, feeding it slowly, shielding it from wind gusts near the entrance, splitting damp logs to reach the dry wood hidden in the center, peeling bark from birch trees, because birch bark contains a compound that keeps it burning even when it's soaked through. That fire wasn't just heat, it was light, safety, cooked food, and the only thing standing between the group and everything waiting in the dark outside. Now picture the fire holding. You're dry enough. You're not going anywhere for at least another day. So what do you actually do with that time? You build. The archaeological record inside cave sites is dense with half-finished tools, sharp flakes of stone scattered in tight clusters exactly where someone would have sat close to firelight for hours, shaping and reshaping the same edge. At Blombos Cave on the South African coast, archaeologists uncovered something far stranger than tools. A workshop for pigment, abalone shells used as mixing containers, ground ochre, bone tools for stirring and applying it. Someone sat there roughly 100,000 years ago, likely while rain fell outside, and ran what was essentially a small production line. Then there's rope. At a site in southern France linked to Neanderthal occupation, researchers recovered a tiny fragment of twisted plant fiber, cord that had been deliberately spun rather than simply found. In Germany, a carved ivory tool with spiral grooves was identified as a dedicated rope-making device. A tool whose entire purpose was twisting plant fiber into something stronger than any single strand. Rope isn't glamorous. It's slow, repetitive, fiddly work, which makes it close to the perfect task for someone who has absolutely nowhere else to be. And once rope exists, so does almost everything downstream of it. Better shelters, snares, tools lashed to handles. An enormous share of human technology quietly depends on someone, at some point, sitting still long enough to twist a rope. People weren't only making tools during these stretches. They were making their shelters livable. Excavations led by archaeologist Lynn Wadley at Sibidu Cave uncovered layered bedding tens of thousands of years old, built from sedges and rushes, with a top layer of leaves from a plant that naturally repels insects. That bedding was periodically burned and replaced. Someone wasn't just enduring that cave, they were maintaining it, cleaning it, treating it like a home worth taking care of. And then, almost impossibly, there's the art. Deep inside caves in southern France, paintings estimated at roughly 36,000 years old show lions mid-stride, horses caught turning their heads, animals rendered with an understanding of anatomy and motion that still stops researchers in their tracks. Similar art in Indonesia has been dated to over 40,000 years old, among the oldest figurative art known anywhere on Earth. And here's the detail that matters most. These images aren't near the entrance, where you'd expect people sheltering from weather to stay close to the exit. They're deep. Sometimes hundreds of meters in, through passages you'd have to crawl through, reached only by carrying a small flame in a stone lamp through total darkness. Nobody does that on a good day. Nobody crawls into absolute blackness to paint an animal from memory when the hunting is easy and the sun is out. You do that when every tool is already sharpened, every rope already twisted, and there is nothing left to do but go further into the dark and make something. We can't prove every painting was born on a rainy week, but the pattern lines up too well to ignore. The moments of heaviest creative output in prehistory keep showing up in exactly the places where people were most likely to be stuck, which points to something bigger than tools or paint. Rain may have helped build culture itself. Think about what happens when 15 or 20 people are forced into one dry space for days with nothing urgent to do. They talk. In the 1990s, anthropologist Polly Weissner recorded and compared daytime and nighttime conversations among the Ju-Hwanzi people of the Kalahari. During daylight hours, conversations stayed practical. Complaints, logistics, disputes over resources. But after dark, gathered around a fire, more than 80% of what people talked about shifted to stories, songs, and shared history. Firelight changed the subject. It softened the room and opened people up in a way daylight never did. That fire wasn't just warmth. It was the original meeting place for passing down everything that actually kept a group alive. Which plant roots were safe to eat and which ones weren't. Where water still ran during a dry season. How to read a track that was already 3 days old. That's not small talk. That's survival, spoken out loud so it could move from one mind into another. And beyond the practical knowledge, there were the explanations. Every culture that has ever existed has some story about where rain comes from and why it stops. Someone had to invent those first. And it's a safe bet they invented them while sitting in the exact situation the story was trying to explain. Some of that storytelling held up for an extraordinary length of time. Oral traditions among Aboriginal Australian communities describe coastline changes that match sea level shifts from roughly 7,000 years ago, confirmed against actual geological evidence. 7,000 years of accuracy, carried by nothing but people repeating a story to each other generation after generation. That kind of memory doesn't happen by accident. It happens because groups spent enormous stretches of time with nothing to do but sit together and tell the same story again. So the waiting wasn't wasted. It was the transfer point. The hours when the old taught the young, when skills got demonstrated by hand instead of explained in words, when the group's whole memory got refreshed one more time. And here's the twist nobody expects. Rain wasn't only a threat. Sometimes it was the best possible outcome. Once the rain stopped, the ground it left behind was soft, and soft ground holds a track like nothing else. Every footprint sat there clear and deep, telling you exactly what walked past, how recently, and how fast. Some of the best tracking conditions on Earth exist in the hours right after a storm breaks. Rain also meant water you could actually collect. Natural stone basins that fill during a downpour sit near an enormous number of known prehistoric sites, and some show signs of being deliberately carved deeper, shaped by hand to hold more. Food changed too, rather than disappeared. Mushrooms surged, tubers pulled easily from softened soil. Insects surfaced by the thousands. In parts of tropical Africa, termites swarm en masse right after heavy rain, and they're one of the densest protein sources available anywhere, requiring no tools and no risk. Chimpanzees still gorge on these swarms today. It would be strange if early humans hadn't figured out the exact same trick. So what did ancient humans actually do when it rained all day? Nearly everything that mattered. They protected the one flame keeping them alive. They shaped the tools they'd carry into the next hunt. They twisted the rope holding their shelters together. They ground the pigment that would end up on a cave wall no sunlight has ever touched. They told the stories that carried survival knowledge across generations they would never meet. And when the storm finally broke, they walked back out into soft, perfect tracking ground and got straight back to work. The rain didn't cost them time. It gave it to them. Every tool, every painting, every story passed down by firelight. All of it came from the hours when going outside simply wasn't an option. You will probably never sit in a cave, feeding a fire you cannot afford to lose, while rain falls for 3 straight days outside. But the next time a storm rolls in and you find yourself oddly restless, unable to just sit still and do nothing, some very old part of you may still be waiting for a job to do.